standard song, a la George Gershwin or Rodgers and Hart. I mean,
picture the scene in Los Angeles back in 1979. The famous Troubadour Club was alive with energy, filled with the sounds of guitar checks, clinking glasses, and music legends walking through the halls. Then suddenly, everything changed. A young assistant rushed into the promoter's office, clearly upset and shaken. Linda Ronstadt had just stormed out of the green room again. The reason was simple but shocking. She had seen a single name on the performance list. It wasn't her name or the Eagles that bothered her. It was his name. One look at that list and she was gone. No argument, no questions asked, just a cold exit that left everyone in complete silence. For many years, nobody really understood what happened that night at the Troubadour. Linda never explained her sudden departure. There were no public fights or dramatic scenes that made it into the tabloids. She always maintained her composure during interviews and kept her image of unshakable grace intact. For decades, she kept that silence completely untouched. But now, in this fictional account, we imagine that silence being broken. In a rare moment of complete honesty, Linda Ronstadt finally reveals the 7 musicians she never forgave. These weren't just simple disagreements or small grudges that faded over time. These were the people who hurt her pride, questioned her artistic abilities, and showed her the darkest sides of the music industry. The list of names isn't what most people would expect. These weren't harmless arguments between artists or old grudges that didn't matter anymore. These were the stories that helped define an entire era of rock and roll, full of power games, broken friendships, and quiet acts of revenge. The most shocking part of all this was that some of the names on that list were once her closest friends and allies in the music world. The first person on this imagined list was a drummer who became a superstar, someone who used Linda as a stepping stone to fame, and then completely ignored everything she had done for him. This drummer was Don Henley, who became too big for his own good. Before the Eagles became the kings of rock music, Don Henley was just Linda's drummer and backup singer, grateful for any spotlight she could give him. In the early 70s, Linda Ronstadt was the rising star, filling theaters from coast to coast with eager fans. Henley was the quiet guy sitting behind the drum kit, soaking up all the benefits of her growing fame. She gave him his first real chance to make it big in the music business. But as the Eagles began to take off and find success, everything started to change between them. Suddenly, Henley wasn't the humble musician he used to be. His ego grew larger and larger as the band became more successful. The group that once opened for Linda's shows now walked through Sunset Boulevard like they owned the entire street. Henley, more than anyone else, began acting like he was the king of the canyon, completely brushing off the woman who had helped launch his entire career in the first place. The breaking point between them came in 1975. They were backstage at the Universal Amphitheater when Henley made a comment that still hurt Linda to this day. He mocked the direction her music was taking, sneering that she should stick to doing cover songs and let the real songwriters do the talking. Those words weren't just insulting to her personally. They completely dismissed everything she had built through hard work, heart, and pure natural talent. Linda didn't just walk out of that conversation. She immediately took away his tour credentials right on the spot. There were no second chances given. Word spread quickly through the music industry about what had happened. Henley's arrogance had gone completely unchecked for far too long. Friends and roadies spoke quietly among themselves about his cocaine-fueled tantrums, his ego-driven decisions, and the cruel comments he would throw around behind closed doors when people couldn't defend themselves. What hurt Linda the most wasn't just the betrayal of their friendship. It was the complete lack of respect he showed her. In private conversations, she would later call him a climber who had lost his soul while chasing fame and fortune. But Henley wasn't the only musician who crossed a serious line with Linda. Her next major conflict didn't happen quietly backstage where nobody could see it. Instead, it played out live in front of a full audience, complete with a drunken frontman, a stolen microphone, and a moment of public humiliation so embarrassing that she never got over it. The night Jim Morrison crossed the line was in 1968. The summer of love had already passed, but the chaos and wildness hadn't disappeared yet. The Doors were electric and powerful, burning through every stage they performed on. Linda Ronstadt was still fighting tooth and nail to carve out her own place in an industry dominated by men. That particular night, at a private after-party near the famous Whiskey A Go-Go, music legends and misfits mixed together freely. But nobody expected what would happen when Jim Morrison spotted Linda across the room. Morrison was already several drinks into the evening, his shirt half unbuttoned, swaggering through the crowd with his usual confidence. In the middle of a performance, in a moment that was equal parts madness and pure ego, Morrison pulled Linda onto the stage without any warning at all. It wasn't planned ahead of time. It wasn't cute or charming. It was completely reckless and inappropriate, and then he leaned in close to her. Right in front of everyone watching, he tried to kiss her without her permission. Linda pulled back instinctively, not wanting any part of what was happening. Morrison lost his balance from the alcohol and her rejection, stumbled directly into her microphone stand, and nearly brought the entire setup crashing down onto the stage. The crowd didn't know how to react. There were gasps, stares, and whispers throughout the room. People didn't know whether they should laugh at what they were seeing or panic about what might happen next. The moment was never caught on camera, but it became an underground legend that was passed around backstage and through late-night radio stories for many years to come. Morrison never apologized for what he had done that night. In fact, he made things even worse. Months later, during a radio interview, he mocked Linda publicly, calling her sweet but spineless, dismissing her as someone who was harmless and completely forgettable. Linda didn't respond publicly to his comments. She never did that kind of thing. But behind closed doors, her words about him cut very deep. Within her inner circle of friends, she called Morrison a brilliant wreck who poisoned everything and everyone around him. To her way of thinking, he wasn't just a chaotic performer putting on a show. He was a perfect symbol of the toxic masculinity that tried to dominate every single corner of the music world. While Morrison's drunken antics left emotional bruises that took time to heal, the next betrayal wasn't delivered with slurred words or unwanted kisses. It came during what should have been a moment of unity, when Linda thought she was among friends, supporting a cause she believed in deeply, a movement she had actually risked her career to support. That was until one of her so-called allies turned on her when the protest became personal. The conflict with Neil Young happened in 1976. A benefit concert for farm workers had brought together some of the biggest names in rock music, including two artists who were known not just for their incredible voices, but also for their strong convictions and beliefs. Linda Ronstadt and Neil Young appeared to be allies, united together for a cause they both deeply believed in and wanted to support. But once the spotlight hit and the pressure was on, everything changed between them. Backstage tensions began to boil over when Neil started dismissing all of Linda's artistic input and suggestions. He rejected her ideas for the set list, blocked her from performing certain songs she wanted to do, and even criticized her sound as being too commercial for the event. To make the situation even worse, after the show was over, he reportedly told members of the press that Linda wasn't built for protest music. The implication of his words was crystal clear to everyone who heard them. Linda wasn't authentic enough for the fight they were supposed to be fighting together. Linda left the venue that night in tears, completely devastated by what had happened. It wasn't just a simple insult thrown her way. It was a betrayal from someone she had genuinely respected, someone she thought stood for the same values and beliefs that she held dear. Being painted as hollow and fake by a fellow activist cut much deeper than any music critic ever could have managed. That night marked a real turning point in Linda's career and personal relationships. From that moment forward, no matter how noble or important the cause might be, Linda never shared a stage with Neil Young again. Behind closed doors, she called him someone who was loud in his message but cruel in how he carried it out. To her way of thinking, his activism rang completely hollow when it was paired with that kind of arrogance and dismissiveness toward other artists who were trying to help the same causes he claimed to care about. If that moment with Neil Young shook her on a personal level, the next betrayal would devastate her artistically. The next betrayal didn't come from backstage politics or public statements made to the press. It happened right in the middle of a studio recording session, in front of a full room of musicians, where Linda was stripped of her confidence and self-belief with just one chilling comment. The conflict with Frank Zappa showed how genius could sometimes become cruelty. Their meeting in 1974 had all the buzz and excitement of something truly iconic happening. Frank Zappa was the avant-garde and completely unpredictable mad genius of experimental rock music. Linda Ronstadt was genre-defying, vocally unstoppable, and clearly on the rise to even greater success. On paper, it looked like a collaboration that could have completely redefined musical boundaries and created something amazing. Instead, it collapsed completely in just a matter of hours. It all started with genuine promise and excitement. Linda expressed real interest in recording one of Zappa's tracks, thinking it could be an incredible artistic experience. But as soon as they stepped into the recording studio together, things went sideways very quickly. Zappa dismissed all of her creative suggestions with nothing more than a smirk, calling her sound too sanitized and commercial. He accused her of trying to water down his music, claiming she wanted to turn raw art into something that sounded like a jingle fit for car commercials. The tension between them reached its absolute breaking point during a live rehearsal session. In the middle of the session, with everyone playing their parts, Zappa stopped the entire band cold. The room went completely silent, with everyone wondering what was happening. Then, in front of everyone present, he sneered at Linda and said something that cut her to the core. He told everyone in the room that this was what happened when you handed real music to a pop singer. The room froze completely. Linda didn't yell back at him. She didn't start an "are sorry to you" argument. She quietly packed up all of her things and walked out of the studio, feeling humiliated, hurt, and completely done with the entire experience. She never returned to finish the project, and she never attempted to collaborate with Zappa again for the rest of her career. Publicly, Linda said nothing about what had happened in that studio. But behind the scenes, close friends clearly remember her words about the experience. She called Zappa brilliant but brutal, describing him as a mind she could respect, but a man she could never trust again under any circumstances. Creative differences with difficult artists were one thing that Linda had learned to expect in her career. But what came next cut much deeper than artistic disagreements. The next name on her list wasn't an eccentric genius or a chaotic frontman with substance abuse problems. It was someone she had once called family, a fellow trailblazer who turned on her when it mattered most. The fallout with David Crosby happened in the golden haze of Laurel Canyon. Linda Ronstadt and David Crosby had once been like musical family to each other. They shared not just stages and studio time, but an unspoken trust that was rooted in the countercultural movement they had both helped to shape and define. Crosby's harmonies and Linda's genre-crossing vocals were both part of the same revolutionary wave that was changing popular music. In those early days, their bond seemed completely unbreakable. But by 1978, that harmony had turned into serious tension between them. During a vocal recording session for a collaborative track they were working on, Linda made a simple request for a key change that would better fit her vocal range and style. Crosby refused her request completely, brushing her off with a dismissive comment that she should learn to adapt to the music instead of asking for changes. What might have been just a minor disagreement between collaborating artists quickly snowballed into something much bigger and more serious. Heated words were exchanged between them, and their argument didn't stay private within the studio walls. Within just a few days, details of their fight had leaked to the press, turning it into one of the most whispered-about clashes in the entire Canyon music scene. But the situation didn't stop there. Crosby went completely public with his feelings, giving an interview to Rolling Stone magazine where he called Linda manufactured, implying that she was more of a product created by the music industry than a real artist with genuine talent. For Linda, who had built her entire career on raw natural ability and creative instinct, those words were like a dagger straight to her heart. Linda didn't respond to his comments in any interviews or public statements. She never did that kind of thing, preferring to keep her private feelings private. But the silence she maintained was anything but passive or weak. She made a quiet but very pointed move in response to his betrayal. She banned Crosby's name from being spoken around her band and inner circle of friends and colleagues. Studio musicians who worked with her were specifically told not to bring him up in conversation. His music was completely removed from her tour playlists. It was as if David Crosby no longer existed anywhere in her world. To Linda's way of thinking, Crosby had betrayed not just their personal friendship, but also the shared ideals of what Laurel Canyon had once represented to both of them. Privately, She referred to him as a warning sign, living proof that even the most brilliant minds could be completely consumed by ego, drugs, and the pursuit of fame. While Crosby's betrayal was deeply personal and hurt her on an emotional level, the next person on her list represented something colder and more calculated. It was a public insult that turned punk poetry into weaponized cruelty aimed directly at her. The conflict with Elvis Costello was pure punk provocation. It was 1979, and Cleveland was buzzing with energy and excitement. A major music festival had drawn together both established icons and up-and-coming new artists. Linda Ronstadt, fresh off a string of chart-topping albums that had cemented her place in music history, was one of the main headliners. She was at the absolute peak of her powers as a performer, an established force that commanded respect throughout the industry. That night, all eyes were on her performance, and one pair of those eyes belonged to Elvis Costello. Costello was the new kid on the music scene at that time. He was brash, brilliant, and barely filtered in anything he said or did. He was punk rock's intellectual rebel, carrying a chip on his shoulder and having something to prove to the world. But nobody expected what happened next between him and Linda. In front of a cluster of music reporters, Costello sneered at Linda's performance, calling her entire set nothing more than background music for brunch. It was much more than just a simple jab between artists. It was a deliberate and public humiliation designed to hurt her reputation. The comment spread quickly through the music community, and when Linda confronted him backstage afterward, hoping for some kind of explanation or maybe even an apology, she got something entirely different instead. Costello, who was reportedly drunk and full of arrogance, looked Linda directly in the eye, threw another cold insult her way, and then walked off without offering even a single word of remorse for what he had done. Linda never looked back or tried to reconcile with him after that incident. To Linda's way of thinking, Elvis Costello represented something much bigger than just one rude remark made by a young artist. He embodied a new kind of performer who was clever but completely heartless, critical of others but without any compassion or understanding. She didn't see his behavior as genuinely rebellious against the music establishment. Instead, she saw it as being cruel just for the sake of cruelty itself. She saw no soul or genuine artistic purpose in his defiance, only ego and a desire to hurt others. But even that bitterness and disappointment couldn't compare to the final heartbreak on Linda's imagined list. The last name wasn't a wild rocker or a brash newcomer trying to make a name for himself. It was someone whose musical style should have harmonized perfectly with hers. This was a voice so compatible with her own that it seemed like fate itself was trying to put them on the same artistic path. But behind the scenes, their clash was completely undeniable, and what should have been a dream collaboration turned into a silent war between two major talents. The conflict with Paul Simon was about the difference between perfection and control. In 1982, it seemed like the absolutely perfect collaboration was about to happen. Paul Simon was one of the most respected songwriters of his generation, and Linda Ronstadt was the reigning queen of genre-defying vocals. When she agreed to record a duet with him for his upcoming album, both fans and music industry insiders buzzed with excitement about what they might create together. On paper, it truly was a dream pairing that should have produced something magical. In reality, it turned into a slow, burning nightmare for everyone involved. From the very first rehearsal session, things felt completely wrong between them. Simon nitpicked every aspect of Linda's vocal delivery, constantly interrupting takes to correct phrasing that didn't actually need any fixing. He rewrote lyrics without bothering to consult her about the changes, and he offered vocal advice that felt much more like thinly veiled criticism than helpful collaboration. According to people who were close to Linda during that time, she later described the entire experience as feeling like she was being scolded by a school principal, rather than working with a creative partner. And every single note she sang was met with scrutiny and criticism instead of support and encouragement. The natural chemistry that should have existed between two such talented artists never materialized at all. The creative spark that everyone expected completely fizzled out under the weight of ego and condescension. The song they were working on was ultimately shelved, remaining unfinished, unreleased, and unspoken about for many years afterward. But for Linda, the damage wasn't really about losing one track from an album. It was about being treated as less than an equal partner in the creative process. A voice like hers and a legacy like she had built deserved to be treated with respect and as an equal collaborator. Instead, she felt like she was dealing with a dictator who wanted complete control over every aspect of the project. After that disappointing experience, Linda made a quiet promise to herself that she would stick to for the rest of her career. She would never step into a recording studio with Paul Simon again, no matter what kind of project might be offered to her. With that final fracture in her relationships with fellow musicians, Linda Ronstadt's imagined silence on her biggest betrayals had officially come to an end. 7 musicians, 7 emotional scars, all hidden behind decades of public elegance and grace until this fictional moment of revelation. The reason Linda supposedly kept these conflicts quiet for all those years was simple. She had never been someone who wanted to feed the gossip machine or create drama in the media. For decades, she preferred to let her music do all the talking for her. But in this imagined scenario, these revelations aren't about getting revenge on people who hurt her. They're about finally telling the truth about what it was like to survive in the music industry as a woman. She built her incredible legacy not just on natural talent and hard work, but also on surviving the egos, betrayals, and ruthless nature of the music business itself. In finally telling these stories, she wouldn't be trying to tear other people down or damage their reputations. Instead, she would be lifting a veil on the reality of what happened behind the scenes during one of music's most important eras. Sometimes the greatest strength an artist can show isn't found in the songs they choose to sing, but in the silence they eventually choose to break when the time is right to tell their truth.